a Dyson floor lamp, a £4,000 fountain pen, box sets of Scandi noir TV dramas.
These are all things that Peter Murrell, former Chief Executive of the SNP and husband of the former Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, bought with party funds over the last decade.
Oh, Peter. Today, we turn our attention to what happens when money meets politics.
And ask, should MPs get paid more?
Time for Helen and I to disagree agreeably, as they say.
Or not, depending on how this show goes. I'm Helen McNamara, the former Deputy Cabinet Secretary.
And I'm Cleo Watson, a former Special Advisor in Number 10.
And this is In the Room.
Before we get into it, we'd love it if you followed us on Instagram, where you can find all the best clips of the show. Our handle is @intheroom.pod. You can also watch us on YouTube. We are called In the Room Politics.
And if you've got a burning question or you just want to send us some fan mail, you can email us on intheroom@independent.co.uk. Let's start with the story that's caught our eye, which is this extraordinary litany of crimes, in fact, that Peter Murrell has admitted to yesterday. Cleo.
Yeah, so the Dyson floor lamp and the Scandi noir dramas were just a drop in the ocean of what he has been spending £400,000 worth of SNP money on. Should we do a quick CV of Peter Murrell, just so everyone knows where we are if they've been living under a rock this morning? He was the chief executive of the Scottish National Party from 2001 to 2023, so quite a long time in the role, and he was married to the former Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon until last year.
So Nicola Sturgeon has said, and we should be clear about this, because she said very clearly, repeatedly, that she knew absolutely nothing about these luxury items. She's as shocked by everybody else at the criminality.
Yeah, so she had quite an interesting defence, and a fair one probably, which was we both earned pretty good money. We weren't spending much because we didn't get to socialise much or go on holidays because I was doing this big job. So I just assumed were things that he'd bought out of our own money, and they don't have a shared bank account. So it just wouldn't have occurred to her, I guess, to verify his receipts and so on. But it is embarrassing. I've actually got a bit of a soft spot for the motorhome because I just think there's something very romantic about caravan holidays, canal boat holidays like Rosie and Jim.
Don't think Cleo's been on either a caravan or canal boat holiday.
I have but I'm bent double for almost the whole time because
I'm far too tall to fit into a caravan or a canal boat, surely.
Yeah, it's just like all these stories. It's actually very serious what he's done. It's nearly £500,000 worth of money he's embezzled from party funds,
and that means from donors. I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah.
There's lots of people who are very angry. So this is people who were thinking that they were donating to the cause of Scottish independence, which is something they feel very strongly about, and donating quite small amounts of money. And then there he is spending thousands of pounds on a pen, which is the only bit of it that I actually understand.
Yeah, I was looking at the pen stuff and I was thinking, that is so you.
I mean, I do love a pen. I've never, to be clear, spent more than a normal amount of money on a pen.
In over 12 years, he spent £22,844 on pens. They're not biros, these are like luxury fountain pens. What's your pen budget, Helen?
It's significantly, I'd say 100th of that maybe, over the same period.
But as ever with these things, it's a serious amount of money, it's a serious crime he's committed. But the juicy stuff is the small bits that he's spent it on. Or actually not that small, because we were talking about pens there. The motorhome, he bought part of a Jaguar SUV, a VW Golf. He bought boutique cosmetics, which I'm keen to learn.
What's a boutique cosmetic?
I know. I'm keen to know more about that. Do you think that's part of Nicola's glow up?
I don't know. She does look great, to be fair.
What we've got here, the robot lawnmower.
Ooh.
Gosh, look at that.
That looks quite scary. What's that?
That's a Jaguar. It's a Jaguar car.
£81,000.
Oh, that's a good correction. Can I just say a Jaguar car as opposed to...
He bought this massive...
He bought a massive cat.
Got the fully automatic bean to cup coffee machine, £2,500.
£2,500. Wow, that's a fancy one.
Oh my goodness.
What's
so they
that?
are, just so everyone knows, these are the ugliest salt and pepper shakers I've ever seen. And they are £2,618. For the pair, I imagine. Bargain.
And there it is.
There's the motorhome.
The motorhome,
Wow.
£124,000.
Gosh, that's a lot of money.
I mean, there's fun to be had here, for sure. But the whole thing does dredge up something we're quite familiar with, which is money meets politics.
Yes, and also risk-taking behaviour by individuals who ought to know better and slightly get stuck in these situations.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to cast our minds back, Helen, as we love to do, to our experiences of being in the room for these kinds of stories. So we should be absolutely clear that, Peter Murrell, he's been remanded in custody. He's in big trouble. He's absolutely committed a crime here.
This is not minor misdemeanours or slightly fudging something. It's proper criminality.
Yeah, but the minor misdemeanours and slightly fudging something was very much part of our day-to-day lives not that long ago. So obviously, before you were Deputy Cabinet Secretary, you were Director General of Propriety and Ethics. And I worked as a special advisor. And the first time I really remember, we worked together, but the first thing I remember us really working together on was Boris Johnson's trip to Mustique, which, to be clear, is not in the category of Peter Murrell here at all. It was legal, but it was confused. It was misdeclared, and there was a kind of sort of farce, really, while we tried to work out the details of what had gone on. And you're there in your capacity of, in some ways protecting the government and the Prime Minister. And I was there on very much the party political side. He'd got the trip through a donor, and it had been declared through his parliamentary expenses. And in the end,
or not, it turned out.
Yes, misdeclared is actually the term. And I think it was just a great example of quite a lot of time wasted, actually, trying to get to the bottom of it.
I definitely remember that, yes.
And actually a huge hoo-ha in the media about the holiday, which actually ended up being fine. But it was the details of it. It's the idea that it's a private island and that, you can spend up to X many thousands of pounds being there.
Yeah, and look, in that story and in general, there is an issue where there's a perception of a kind of murky and muckiness between politicians and money. And over the last kind of period of time, we've seen an awful lot of things emerging where effectively what's happened is a politician is trying to live a lifestyle which they don't earn the money to match. And, there be trouble. Boris Johnson was a good example of that. He's by no means the only example of that. And there's a whole history in our recent political lives. So we saw some of this when Keir Starmer was elected with who'd bought all these clothes and these fancy glasses and various things. There is this kind of disconnect and mismatch between how much of a kind of luxe lifestyle politicians seem to want to have and then where does the money come from to support this sort of lifestyle, because it sure as hell does not come from the salary you get paid as an MP or the salary you get paid as a minister. However grand they might seem, they do not match the kind of lifestyle that these people seemingly feel like they deserve or should be living.
And on top of that, what tripped up Boris Johnson on Mustique was the holiday being misdeclared. And there's an interesting disconnect, I think, between what is technically allowed, what are politicians allowed to claim, what are they allowed to spend public money on, what are they allowed to spend donors' money on, and what passes what you might call the sniff test, which is what do the public find acceptable to have money gifted to politicians for, public money spent on politicians for.
And some of these scandals have just been transparency in the clear light of day on a practice that has been really normal in Westminster for a very long time. So we thought we'd start this discussion with going back quite a long way, where I think you were still at university. So unfairly, I'm going to ask you to explain to our dear listeners what exactly was going on in the expenses scandal.
Yeah, so this is 2009, and we've talked about this before, Helen. There have been so many other expenses scandals surrounding politicians. I mean, going back decades, but I think this really sticks in the mind, this one, and it's certainly one of my core memories about politics from the noughties. And it came a year after the 2008 crash. And I think that is actually quite important for how the 2009 expenses scandal landed and what it meant for the 2010 general election, because the public already felt like fat cats had won, banks had been bailed out, and then seeing the list of what MPs had been claiming on their expenses in Parliament just really came as a kind of whiplash at the end. So I'll read a few out just to remind people. Sir Peter Viggers claimed £1,645 for a floating duck house, and over £30,000 for gardening, which included 28 tonnes of manure. So I'm guessing he didn't have little...
Insert joke here.
Yeah, he didn't have little semi round for his small garden round the back. Douglas Hogg claimed £2,115 to have the moat cleaned at his Lincolnshire manor house. I mean, those moats don't clean themselves, famously.
It turns out.
Others claimed for dog food, bathrobes, chandeliers, tennis court repairs, and claims ranged up to about £90,000 spent on upkeep of one MP's country estate. But there were other things too, weren't there? There were small things like 76 pence on packets of biscuits and like stuff that felt a bit petty also.
It was the small meanness and the kind of big audacity of how on earth do you think the taxpayer should be paying for that I think particularly resonated. And some of these things, so the famous Duck House example, the fees office didn't allow him to claim that expense, but the scandal was the fact that these MPs felt they were entitled to claim these things, which was a sort of the massive kind of shock factor. And I remember, I was a civil servant working in DCMS, that's Department of Culture, Media and Sport, at the time this all happened.
Gosh, what did it feel like?
Well, the interesting thing is the people I think were most angry were MPs and ministers who hadn't been doing this. So I think the sort of collective shock at the fact that their colleagues had thought this was okay, I really remember that, and the kind of vitriol felt by people who had not just been technically following the rules, but had been showing entire common sense and not trying to game the system, and actually rather the reverse, had been trying to think about what's the smallest amount that I can claim because this seems reasonable, and had effectively, either through their family themselves, been subsidising the other way round, were really genuinely shocked by what they saw was where their colleagues had drawn the line. So it was a proper recoil moment, I think, for Westminster. And it wasn't the case that all MPs were at it, because they really weren't. That was a shock too.
And it does really speak to, we've talked about this so much. We've talked about how the public have felt since the 2008 crash, what the Brexit referendum meant, what, 2019 meant, what 2024 has meant. And this really does fit in with the general perception of the political class, what the establishment are up to. And people don't remember, for example, that £1.3 million spread out between 392 politicians. That's actually quite a lot of the House of Parliament. Had to repay that back. People remember the duck pond and the manure and the tennis courts and the biscuits and that kind of thing. And it's these small details, just like we were saying about Peter Murrell, that sort of hurts more in some ways than the actual figures, and let alone what came afterwards. So the whole system was tightened up, was it not?
It was, but it's also that thing where you realise that even though you all thought you were doing the same job, actually some of you were operating in an entirely different world. And you get similar things when there's a certain kind of person who works in public life, whether that is a civil servant or an MP or a person who's working in an MP's office, who will have such a strong version of this money doesn't belong to me. And this is a non-party political point, by the way. I've seen and observed this behaviour amongst people who work for all political parties, that you have such a strong sense of this money isn't mine, and therefore my job is to make the most of it and spend the least of it. And of course I will effectively, if I think about the senior civil servants I worked with, quite often you don't claim expenses. Of course you don't. Actually you end up paying yourself for, the taxpayer shouldn't be paying for pizza for your team in the office at 9 o'clock in the evening, so you pay for it, and all these other things that you just kind of cross-subsidise the other way. And then you realise that actually there's a whole set of other people who are not only not playing by those rules, they are in fact making some quite breathtaking choices about who they think owes them a living and where this money's come from, and that they will claim expenses for all manner of things.
Oh yeah, everyone has a friend, right, where say you go out for a meal together and most of you think we'll just cut it 4 or 6 ways, and it doesn't matter if someone had a starter or not. We've all got a friend who's like, can I see if I can pay a bit less than my fair share, or I'm only going to pay for what I had? There are people, and we've all done this a bit, where I think it feels, I think one of the reasons it hurts so much is it kind of feels true to a lot of people too. Everyone knows someone who will absolutely expense, I don't know, 11p or whatever it is off their train fare or whatever to absolutely get what they want. And the rest of us are just I just don't know if I can be asked.
Yeah, entirely. Or not just what they want, what they feel like they're entitled to. And I think that's one of the other kind of rotten threads that goes through politics and money, is that you see this disconnect between ministers in particular, but it doesn't have to be ministers, it can be MPs, who are living a life that they actually can't afford.
Yes, well, we've got a very good example of that, actually, which was another of the issues that we worked on together was when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister and he wanted to redecorate his flat.
The flat that belongs to the taxpayer.
That is the Prime Minister's residence, and they pay council tax on that, in Downing Street. And I just think it's a great example of, I think in many ways, he ended up as Prime Minister living a bit beyond his means, and we can talk about salaries later because I do think it's an interesting question that you and I can disagree on sometimes. But what is interesting there is that he did not defraud the taxpayer in any way. He did not misuse public funds. The Conservative Party, via a donor, actually helped him do the renovations that he wanted to do in the Downing Street flat. Now, the Conservative Party did get fined by the Electoral Commission. So again, this was not a legal problem, but it was a misuse of party funds because, guess what, it wasn't declared properly. But again, the stuff people remember from that whole story was things like gold wallpaper and less so about actually where the money came from, who gave the money, how it was used.
It's the out of touch thing, right? And it's a touch of the Marie Antoinette when you are, spending a lot of time and money, however much, whoever's paying for it, the fact that you are spending that amount of money on interior design and wallpaper is not a great look.
Yes, although I would argue, I can't really believe I'm doing this because I do actually support your point, but I think it is a stronger case that he wasn't using public money to do it. It's a bit like how I feel about policing football matches. Football matches cost the taxpayer a lot of money to police, and when you see how much Premier League footballers earn and what clubs make, I think they should pay for it.
I did not have Cleo Watson talking about football on my bingo card for today.
I know. That is the extent of my knowledge. I've just used it all.
That's quite an argument to start, Watson.
Very excited about the World Cup. You're absolutely right, though. Like, he didn't use public money. In some ways, I think he did it the right way, which was to get a donor
and
to
be
do
really
it.
clear, I'm not advocating that public money should have been spent on Lulu Little and gold wallpaper. I'm saying you've got 2 or 3 problems that all come together here. One, which is politicians thinking, wouldn't it be really nice? Or shouldn't I be looking really great in all my lovely clothes? So Keir Starmer and his wife and various other figures in the New Labour government, not New Labour, capital N, New Labour, small n, got into trouble because a Labour donor, again, Wahid Ali, had been paying for clothes and for some very snazzy glasses and various things, which on, Keir Starmer's salary, presumably he decided he couldn't afford, didn't want to afford. And there is a really weird thing where we actually ask, particularly if you think about the spouse of the Prime Minister, male or female, to always look fine and
go to these events
and go to a lot of events. I'm pretty sure that Vic Starmer's normal workaday life wardrobe would not include 18 different dresses you need to wear for these different events. And there is an argument about, is it okay, is it not okay? But it just looks so bad and it looks so out of touch, and the sums of money for normal people are just ridiculous.
Yeah, in that case, it was nearly £40,000. It's a lot of money on clothes. And again, you're right, this is not taxpayers' money, it's Lord Ali's money. But I think there was a much cleverer, more sophisticated way for Labour to have handled that. The Conservative Party, I don't know if it does anymore, but certainly when they were in opposition before 2010, there was a kind of leaders' budget which was put aside specifically for this, for some discreet travel and for some discreet clothes and this kind of thing. And
I was so naive about this stuff though, because I remember the conversations with the party about the flat, saying what? Hold on. People who donate money or are members of the Conservative Party are giving money and then this is how it's being spent. It was baffling to me, I have to confess.
Hey, you've got to look good.
Well, I don't disagree with that for one second.
In many ways, it's just like a clever catch-all wheeze, I suppose, to be able to, use helicopters and cars and like I said, clothes and that kind of thing. And it's a way to be able to make sure the leader is taken care of, particularly because you don't get the same kind of help as you do when you're in government. It means it's a stress that they're not having to worry about quite so much. So it's things like, the spouse of a leader of a party, let alone the Prime Minister, might want to have a completely normal life and keep working. But in lots of cases, they actually can't because their partner now has a very, very full-on job. And this isn't a way to sort of salary them, but you can at least make sure that the family have what they need to be able to
And that would be
carry
better,
on.
right? It's cleaner to do a version of there is a sort of allowance for the family or the person.
Right.
And this is how we fund it and this is what we do. And it's a tailor's older time and it's the same for everybody and it's always like this. That would be much cleaner than what you sometimes get is kind of discovering it later.
Yeah, instead of having to declare item by item, £2,485 on glasses.
We've got a couple of other kind of examples swirling around at the moment. So there's, Zach Polanski's non-payment of his council tax, which is does raise questions of who do you think was paying it? Who do you think pays for these things? Even if you're not a member of the GLA and somebody who effectively works in local government, you know that you're supposed to pay council tax. So were you so incurious that you didn't pay attention to that yourself? I think that looks like who do you think owes you a living? And then we've also got Nigel Farage at the moment and an undeclared, technically probably correctly undeclared donation, but nevertheless it just looks like you're living a lifestyle that you aren't exactly paying for.
Yes, I actually wanted to ask you about this specifically because it's such an interesting one. This £5 million donation was gifted to him before he became an MP. In fact, apparently before he even decided to stand as an MP. So he was a private individual, but very much in the public eye. So this is for security and so on. This is the understanding. But it didn't come to light until The Guardian reported it. We see this reaction often, whether it's the expenses scandal, whether it is the, COVID VIP lanes, things like that, where the state reacts once it becomes clear that something isn't fit for purpose. Do you think it will be the case that we might start looking at what have politicians earned, say, 5 years before they've come into elected office or anything like that?
So I think one of the problems with these scandals is that the reflex is to look shocked and horrified by it and then create some more rules. And so that everybody can say, well, technically I was within the rules and then it's the rules' fault.
And the process.
And the process. Our offline rules and process. And, I was only obeying orders. Here I am. I mean, I think there is whatever Mr. Farage is saying about his rationale for why he did or he didn't do these things, a personal donation of that size to a party leader is just kind of common sense. That firstly, you should have anticipated at some point that was going to come out because people can do some really simple maths about where did you get all that money from? So, you should always be ahead of these things. And I don't think the answer is rules and process. I think the answer is actually behaving reasonably and responsibly and sensibly. And the more that we create this extraordinary industrial kind of architecture around these things, the less we're putting responsibility on the individual, who particularly in politicians' cases, and we can get to another day of how this should work for people who aren't elected, but you can get fired by the electorate. That's the beauty of our political system. And actually, over a long period of time, what's happened is people who've been caught up in money scandals, more so than people who've been caught up in sex scandals, do get fired by the electorate. So there's a natural justice that comes around at some point.
One of the things that also struck me about the Farage donation is, regardless of where you stand on his links to crypto and this fellow Harborn is based in Thailand, is there are plenty of members of the Commons who will have earned a hell of a lot of money before they came into Parliament as well, certainly be millionaires themselves. And so there's something in how do we feel about, rich people coming to Parliament versus, having earned it or because they have family and private wealth or whatever, or having been gifted it. And it all falls into quite an interesting and murky sphere, and it's a public perception sphere. And then the people who end up needing to expense things and declare things get a bit more pilloried because they do actually need this stuff.
This is one of the things that I have quite strong views about, and you and I don't agree on.
I know, it's so exciting. Talk about fight of the century, a podcast where they do actually disagree sometimes. But I think before we come to blows and decide that this is the last episode we ever do.
How much you can't pick on a smaller person. I'm smaller and also older,
very
so
bony
both
knuckles.
2 counts.
But you've got fire.
Also true.
I think it would be good if we did do a little bit of advice because we've certainly covered the problems here. But what would you be advising to any MP or indeed minister or actually perhaps the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner or the Electoral Commission or a journalist reporting some of this stuff, or indeed a member of the public? How should we be receiving this?
So I think it's really important to be totally crystal clear about not just for the independent lawyers, but for ourselves, line we drew right at the top of the episode. Peter Murrell has done something really unusual that is criminal, that he's admitted to in a court, and now he's been remanded in custody, which is kind of fraud on a scale which is extraordinary. So that is so keep on drawing those lines, because it is actually really important that the rest of politics isn't contaminated by something like that, because it's not normal. The second thing I'd say is one of the things you said really early on in this conversation was about the sniff test being the most important. And I used to always, in my boring advice I gave repeatedly and still give repeatedly, is if you have to have a 5-sentence explanation as to why this thing is okay, you know you've already stuffed it, frankly. Don't spend taxpayers' money on things that you wouldn't be perfectly happy being on the front page of the Daily Mail, having spent taxpayers' money on it. And that goes for and all money, there's no magic money here. All money is taxpayers' money if you are working in public life. So either you are foregoing some money from the taxpayer or you're literally spending their cash. And that means not just taxpayers' money in a sort of amorphous, abstract way. I remember having this conversation with some of your, I'm going to use the word colleagues very carefully, but in number 10 on the political advisory team when their holidays were cancelled by Mr. Cummings when Mr. Johnson became Prime Minister, and perfectly reasonably, and I would stand by this entirely, that if you have a holiday booked and then something happens at work and you can't get the money back and you're forced to stay at work, then there is a reasonable scheme where you would get your money back for a holiday. Of course, not like the most ridiculous holiday.
Well, from memory, there were a few quite cheeky claims.
Which were not paid, by the way, because there is a reasonableness test that you should apply. And I just would always say you ought to be imagining yourself forward to having to defend the decision you've just made. And if you have in your mind what a taxpayer is, you should think about an NHS nurse's taxes. So that's whose money you're spending, is somebody who is already working in the NHS. They're nurses who we love rightly to put on a pedestal, and it's those people's taxes that you are spending. So just don't do it.
Yeah, and it's how these things sound. How absurd does it sound to charge people for gold wallpaper or Dyson fans or
taxis sometimes.
Pendant necklace in the shape of the Northern Lights. I think I have some slightly more practical advice too, which is slightly understandably, lots of politicians are just not on top of a lot of this. They'll keep the receipts or whatever for taxis, but when it comes to actually declaring it, they are rarely the person actually going through and writing it down themselves and making it sure it's all sort of tabled properly. We talk about this quite a lot, but hiring the right team is so important. And I don't just mean the right chief of staff. I mean, everyone in your parliamentary office, everyone in the headquarters of your party. You need really good people who are quite forensic and a bit anal about this stuff, because that is ultimately how politicians have quite often been let down in the past, is that the same sense of, does this actually look okay to expense? Should we have a conversation about this? Am I doing it correctly? Do I know the exact details? All that really matters. And that's often what trips you up.
I think the thing I'd say to that is also, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So just because you can claim something and technically it's within the rules doesn't mean you should do it, which is going to sound contradictory to what I'm going to say next, which is, don't claim for everything you technically can do. So therefore equals subsidise it yourself. And then our problem is that actually we don't pay MPs enough money.
Controversial there, Helen, because just a quick reminder to everybody, MP salary currently stands at £98,599. So they are
just underneath the £100,000 tax threshold. You'll note.
Isn't that nice?
So weird.
I mean, that has gone up a lot, even since you and I worked in government. I think it was the mid to late 80s when I was there 5 years ago. Does that sound about right?
I think so. And look, I'm not for 1 second saying that is not a decent salary. Of course it is. What I'm saying is that I think one of the systemic problems we have is that it used to be the case that people who were working in SW1, so that's the geography really matters here, this London postcode, were able to afford a quite reasonable like reasonable brackets, very nice standard of living on those salaries was broadly commensurate with the sort of salary you'd get for another professional middle class job. So not kind of banker money or professional footballer money, but a wage that meant that you could afford the trappings of a middle class lifestyle. Now, you can argue whether that is a good thing or not, and whether politicians should be somewhere else. However, my concern is what we've actually got now is we've got this absolute inability for anybody to put up the salaries of MPs and ministers. And I have had this argument and lost it resoundingly every single time I've tried. So,
well, it just looks terrible, doesn't it? For MPs to say we're voting on our pay rise and we're all unanimous. I mean, it's just impossible.
I totally get that, but what we have instead now is a sort of soft and hidden corruption, which is if you want to, partly because of what's happening to housing costs in central London, that if you want to live within commutable distance of SW1, and you want to be able to devote the hours of your working life that you feel like you need to, and have a family, manage a house, do all of these things, it's almost impossible to do that and live the kind of normal-ish middle-class lifestyle unless you are heavily subsidised by either inherited wealth, previous London housing wealth, or a spouse who is earning loads more than you. And that's, I think, one of the things that we've seen because of all of these choices in the makeup of our political and governing classes is a lot more people where there is tons of kind of soft and hidden money behind, because of course you can get on more in your political party if you can afford to have people around for dinner, or these are all things that I don't actually do, I should point out, but you mean there is like a thing about actually if you can network, if you can afford to pay the bill, if you can afford to have people around your house, if you can afford all of these kind of soft things, do you make a difference to your ability to get on in this world? And we are limiting the ability to get on to a particularly narrow number of people who have wealth that comes from somewhere else. And it's the hiddenness of the wealth that I don't like.
I think that's fair. Certainly the kind of emotional intelligence bit, the soft power in politics that you need. But I guess one of my answers to that is we already subsidise alcohol in the Houses of Parliament so that MPs can do
all
that.
Right, Hannah.
Well, I know. I mean, I'm not sure where I stand on the drinking in Parliament, and Hannah Spencer, the Green MP, has obviously got her views on that. But I do think the fact we do subsidise alcohol for members of Parliament, they already have this opportunity. We are creating, we have amazing dining rooms and we have the terrace. We've got these opportunities for them to invite people onto the parliamentary estate and to try and butter them up that way. You're right. I've seen donor dinners and so forth, and sometimes you think, goodness, it's happening at that person's house, and then you realise this member of parliament or minister has the most amazing house in Chelsea or Belgravia or something like that, and that is not the case for a lot of MPs who are on the train back and forth to Sheffield or flying up to Shetland or whatever it is. I guess, I mean, maybe I'm sort of outing myself as more as a socialist than I realised, but you know, to your point that you're right, MP salaries have not risen with the sort of inflation of middle class salaries. So they're not on a par with GPs and solicitors and that kind of thing. But that is partly because a lot of those people are ridiculously well paid.
So I think the thing that you see is people, and I appreciate this is like a really unpopular view in lots of ways, but I would much rather they're all paid more and then they are not allowed to do other work. And you have much stricter rules about what they can do afterwards. So that actually you're confident that your members of parliament are serving without fear or favour. And, you know, don't get me started on the kind of soft corruption in the House of Lords as well.
I do think the second jobs thing is a really valid point. There are some members of the House of Commons who are making hundreds of thousands of pounds a year because they're able to do separate legal work. They've got other careers spinning along very happily. There are some really impressive members who are medical staff who still do some nursing and doctor's shifts, which I think is really interesting.
Totally.
And there's a funny element of like, oh, well, is that good public service? And actually is some of it sort of evil money making? question here. But one of the things I am quite interested in, and people forget this when ministers lose their jobs or when they resign, is that extra ministerial salary makes a big difference too. It's quite a bit more, isn't it, on top?
It really does. And I'm not, to be clear, I'm not advocating for like spending more of taxpayers' money on salaries. I would have far fewer people in general and pay them much better.
Oh yeah, I know from experience you're very keen on that front.
Very keen on
you like to cut the bill, raise the bar. I think that's Helen's slogan.
Oh my God, that's such a great... Always missing the political thing. Maybe I should go back and try these arguments again. The other thing is I think we are just end up looking a bit like pedestrian as a country in some of these things because we're so minor league. I mean, maybe Peter Murrell has in Scotland created like more of a major league corruption scandal, but we do pay people less anyway than other countries do. When we do these scandals, they're quite small beer. I mean,
totally.
Take our gambling versus what may or may not be going on in the US is a good example of that.
Yes. So I don't know if people remember this because it has been quite seismic, but it was caught up in the general election at the time. But some of Rishi Sunak's team and some people who worked in Conservative Party headquarters and indeed a couple of MPs placed bets on the date of the general election in 2024, knowing when it was going to be called for. So that is obviously illegal. That is, insider trading, however you want to call it. And they only won 500 quid.
Such small bets.
Right. So it's like criminal record for £500. Just for comparison here, because the Americans, obviously, they like to supersize things. There are now some quite well documented cases from the White House where, here's a great example. Just minutes before Trump announced the Iran war was largely over, which obviously caused oil prices to drop.
It's also not actually true.
Not actually. So it's just the announcements, what he's going to say versus then what happens. There were massive bets traded on oil prices.
What, for more than people made more than £500, clear?
They're making in the millions. So obviously the White House has strenuously denied all this. And they've actually said there may be traders simply highly skilled anticipating Trump's unpredictable interventions, which I kind of love. But, there are consistent little spikes before Trump opens his mouth to announce something and various commodities suddenly get traded really, really quickly. I mean, I'm not saying this is like the gold standard to aim for at all, but it's just amazing that we, the things that stick in our minds are, like I said, the duck house and the 500 quid betting and the Dyson Hoover and all the other bits and bobs that has come up in, the last few years.
Yeah, we look small beer by comparison, without a doubt. I mean, the other thing I would say is that, on my kind of, another unpopular opinion, we're not even very good at insider trading properly in the government when it would be legitimate to do it. So one of the many frustrations that I used to have is, when we're announcing a big scheme, like a transport scheme that massively inflates the land value of an area, why haven't we, the government, got ahead of ourselves, bought up the land and be the beneficiary of the... So I would do more, but I think insider trading for a good purpose, let's say.
Well, legal disclaimer aside, I'm sure Peter Mandelson was very good at that when he was working for the Brown government.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Remember to follow the show on your podcast player and leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed it.
Please do email us with feedback and any questions. We are intheroom@independent.co.uk. And if you're listening on Spotify, you can leave lovely little comments underneath.
Thank you callers.
And you can keep up to date with the best bits of the pod on Instagram @intheroom.pod.
This podcast is part of the Independent Podcast Network and produced in association with Next Chapter Studios.
The executive producers today were Rod Adahali, Carrie Rose, and the producer is Sam Durham.
And a special mention to content editor Maya Anushka, video editor Vali Raza, and videographer Dan Faber.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.